Well, welcome again to our service of worship and fellowship. We really hope that you're going to open your heart to the things of God today. We're going to begin by singing a great song announcing that Jesus is our all in all. Well, what a great reminder of who Jesus is and who we are in his sight. And to give that up, we would be fools. We want to welcome you today, and we know that today is a day in which we get to worship God in spirit and in truth. We get to open the Bible together. We get to pray together. We get to just be together in this way. We look forward to, as a church, as I'm sure you do as much as I do, of actually physically being in the same room. But until that happens, we're very grateful to God for the opportunity to worship in this way and to extend the love of God, not just to us in Tuggeranong and beyond, but in Canberra, but really beyond ourselves all throughout Australia and indeed some parts of the world. And we're very glad that you have joined us today. We have a couple of announcements, so bear with us because we've got some very exciting things that we'd love you to be involved with. And as we look at what God is doing in our midst, we are reminded of what it is and to whom we belong. Let me just run through a couple of those announcements for you. The first one is that our campaign of Jesus the Game Changer is already up and running. And if you've downloaded the free app onto your phone or tablet, you can follow along with the discussions with that. But if you'd like to go to our church website, you'll get a link through the heading Jesus the Game Changer, and that'll take you to the first episode, which is all about Jesus and how his life and ministry and finished work has changed the world and is continuing to change the world. So please be aware of that. In addition to the episode, there is a great sermon by Reverend Carl Fays from Olive Tree Media. And also there's some great kids resources so that you can talk to your family and kids and grandkids about Jesus the Game Changer. Also on our church website, if you see that little icon, then that's the way to get updated with everything that is to do with the Garratt Street Centre and the Tuggeranong Baptist Church, and we'd love for you to be involved with that. So just click that particular icon, and that's updated each week, in addition to the email that we send out to you, and we hope that you'll have a great opportunity to update yourself with what's happening. Well, today is a very special day. It's Mother's Day, and we want to extend Mother's Day wishes and prayers for all the mums that are listening and gathered. We hope that you're being treated well. Particularly happy Mother's Day to my mum, Molly, in Sydney. Don't eat all the Turkish delight, keep them from me. But we hope that you'll have a great day, and we celebrate mothers and their very vital role in not only our own lives but in the society in which we live. Here's a kind of a short video that might help us express our thanks to you. We continue in our series about parables, and over the last 3 or 4 weeks we've been looking at the parables of Jesus, that not only what they conceal in terms of those hearing, but what they reveal to us. And we've looked at a bunch of those, and if you'd like to catch up with that, you can go again to our church website and check that out. But today we're looking at the last in this little series. Next week we're going to look at a new series called Becoming Good Neighbours, and we're going to look at how the fruit of God's Spirit in our lives affects not only us but those to whom we will deal with in whatever circumstances, to be good neighbours. But today we're looking at the last of these particular parables, and today we're looking at the parable of the rich fool. Now, this is a story again that may be well known to you, but it's really a response to a question that was asked of Jesus, and it's about a man who remembered the wrong things and forgot the right things. And to get our lives in the perspective they need to be, sometimes we need to reverse that, to forget things that don't matter and remember things that do. So if you'd like to turn to the scriptures with me and turn to Luke chapter 12, then we'll have a look at this great story and parable that Jesus told. It says in verse 16 of Luke's Gospel in chapter 12, "And Jesus told them this parable. He said, the ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. And he thought to himself, well, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. And then he said, well, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and I'll build bigger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you, and you will get what you have prepared for yourself. Jesus then finished the parable by saying, this is how it will be for anyone who stores up for himself things, but is not rich towards God. Now, that parable's not very long, and I'm sure if you've been around churches or maybe went to Sunday school when you were a kid, you've heard of that particular story, of this guy who wanted to build bigger barns. And so it's important that we understand the context in which Jesus is telling this parable. Jesus told parables for a particular reason, and this time a certain man, came to him and asked him a question about his own inheritance. He shared it as a way of trying to sort of win Jesus over to his case. He shared it as a way of kind of wanting to justify his own desire for more than he had. So in this case, he comes to Jesus and he comes to tell Jesus that his brother and him had to divide his father's inheritance with him. Now, this certain man, had a sort of passion for possessions, and Jesus already knew that. Now, in Judaic law, as we learnt last week with the parable of the lost son, it was very clear about the distribution of an inheritance. If you were the older brother, it was well known that you got 2/3 of the inheritance. It kind of sucked to be anybody else but the older brother. But if you were the younger son, you got 1/3. So there was no ambiguity about how much somebody got in the inheritance sort of question. But this younger brother's real problem was the fact that he was not satisfied with his 1/3, with his share. And so he wanted more. And he hoped Jesus might become an ally to his cause. Do you do that? I do that. If I've got a cause, I tend to go to everyone who will agree with my cause and mount a case from there. But Jesus was having none of it. He actually told this parable. And he told a parable about a man who had pretty much what he needed, but wanted to build bigger barns with what he had in excess of what he needed. And he said in the beginning of the parable this kind of warning. He said, "Watch out and be on guard against all kinds of greed, for a person's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." Now, this story is entitled in the scriptures, The Parable of the Rich Fool. There's an author called Frank Pollard who calls it The Farm That Owned the Fool. And I want us to take a closer look at that story and maybe challenge you, as I am challenged, with our relationship to things and greed and all of that stuff that tends to creep into our lives. That makes us forget the right things and remember the wrong. So let's look firstly at what this man forgot. What did the man forget and what did he remember? Well, the first thing we see that he remembered, if you like, was he remembered himself. Now, those of you who remember your high school English will see that the text is full of what's called first-person singular statements. And this is almost a soliloquy of the rich fool. Now, if you read through these verses, you'll see that he said the word I 6 times and used the word my or mine another 4 times. Self was certainly something that the farmer easily recalled. And for us who live in a world that is sort of obsessed with self, this is very relevant. I read of some monks in the Egyptian desert who had a wise but kind of weird custom. You've got all kinds of weird customs if you're a monk in the desert. Their rule was that no monk could ever say, "That is my book," or "my pen," or "my chair," or "my room." And to use any of those words was regarded in that community as an affront and even an offence. And they would have to do penance because of that statement. What they were trying to do was try to get rid of the things that would feed the self. Now, so often in our world, the self takes centre stage. And it's really hard to kind of keep things in perspective. Now, like the rich fool, we can forget about others and remember only ourselves and our needs and what we want. The second thing, the wrong thing that this guy remembered was that he remembered was this temporary world. He remembered that which is temporary at the expense of that which is eternal. Somebody once said, wisely I think, that this world is like a bridge. The wise person will pass over it, but will not build their house upon it. Now, Jesus had some great words to say, didn't he, about building our lives on sand or upon rock. And when the storms of life come, which one will hold? He forgot and remembered the right and wrong things. He remembered this temporary world. Instead of us having things, often they have a habit of having us. And we've got to constantly be on watch and on guard as to whether the things we have in our lives, and there's nothing wrong with things, but whether we have them or in fact they have us. Jesus was warning that it's possible for us to become so preoccupied with the temporary that we forget the eternal. There's an old Russian proverb or story by Tolstoy that goes like this. There was once a story of a poor Russian peasant who was told that he could have all the land that he wanted and desired. The only catch was that he had from sunup to sundown to walk as far as he could, and all the land that he would walk upon would be his. So at the rising of the sun, the peasant began walking as fast as he could. I'd be walking fast too. And so all the land that he would get a walk on, that were going to be his by the end of the day. By mid-morning, it seemed that to him he was moving a little too slowly, and so he quickened his pace. By the afternoon sun was beating down on him, but he even hurried his pace more and more. He felt that if he could just enlarge that circle of walking, then he would have more and more and more. Well, by late afternoon, he was so soaked with sweat from head to toe, but he kept going and he kept going. And he was exhausted, and he walked around this huge section of land. But then he began to run, and he pushed himself into a fatigue that he had never known, and his heart went to in sort of sane levels. And as sundown was only a few minutes away, he ran as fast and as far as he could. But as he raced towards the point of the beginning, the point where he was at sunup, a point where it would make him the largest landowner in the whole district, he fell to the ground and died. It's not a very cheerful story, but it's a story that reminds us of chasing things that don't matter in the end. In the book of Proverbs, the Bible will tell us that there's a great verse that tells us about this very thing. It says, don't wear yourself out to get rich. Have wisdom to show restraint. One of the things that anecdotally has been true of people's experience during this lockdown period is that people are engaging again with things that they have become disengaged with. Family, relationships, time alone, time in quiet, kind of a pause to life. It'll be interesting when we all are unlocked as to what lessons we will learn, or will we go back to wearing ourselves out, pursuing stuff that we don't need. I was talking to somebody in Kmart the other day. I was researching this, but in Kmart, and I said to the person at an appropriate distance, what are you after? And she said to me, well, you know, the trick with Kmart is that you don't come to buy something, that something grabs and buys you. And she was right. Sometimes we just do shopping because it's something to do. It's kind of recreation to us. Don't wear yourself out doing that stuff. It doesn't matter. A little later on, we're going to look at the things that turned this parable on its head. This farmer was foolish because even in his prosperity, he remembered the wrong things. One of the great things that worship does is it focuses us back to the right things. And this next song is a great song. It's a song called Only Jesus. And as you hear the words, be reminded of that rich fool. And maybe you might want to remember that which you've forgotten.
Make it count, leave a mark, build a name for yourself, or dream your dreams, place your heart above all else. Make a name the world remembers. But all an empty world can sell is empty dreams. I got lost in the lie that it was up to me to make a name the world remembers. When Jesus is the only name to remember. And I don't wanna leave a legacy. I don't care if they remember me. Only Jesus. And I've only got one life to live. I'll let every second Jesus is the only name. Jesus is the only name. Jesus is the only name to remember. Oh, Jesus is the only name. Jesus is the only name. Jesus is the only name to remember. And I don't wanna leave a legacy. I don't care if they remember me. Only Jesus. And I've only got one life to live. I let every second point to Him. Only Jesus. And I don't wanna leave a legacy. I don't care if they remember me. Only Jesus.
Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For by it the people of old received their commendation. For by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not your own doing, it is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. For we are His workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand, that we should walk in them. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before Him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain it. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. So I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest, after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith.
Well, what a great reminder, both in song and through God's word, of the kind of race that we're running, the kind of lives that we're leading. And maybe it's a time like no other time in recent years where you've had the time to kind of reflect on what sort of race you're running. Where is your life going? What is your life all about? And this parable is kind of those large questions for us as people and as followers of Jesus. Have we become a bit of a hybrid of what the world offers and what our faith offers, or are we staying the course? Are we running the race that is marked out for us? this man was a fool, this man in the parable, because he remembered the wrong things, that he remembered the wrong things at the expense of the right things. And the story kind of flips, that not only did he remember the wrong things, he forgot the right things. And that can be just as crucially bad. And as we read the story, we see a bunch of things that this man forgot. I've got a bunch of stuff there that I want to just work through real briefly with you. The first thing is that he forgot his neighbours. If his barns were too small to hold the crops, there must have been, I guess, many people around him who could do with a bit extra, a bit of the leftovers or the overflow of this man's possessions. But we never hear any of that. If perhaps he had looked around instead of looking at himself, he might have seen a way of generously depositing some of which he had. This story, we don't read a single word about him blessing anybody else. It's just about him. Stock it away somewhere for your future use. Forget about sharing with others in need. What a foolish and kind of sad way to live. What a joyless way to live. The second thing that he forgot is that he forgot where real joy, or the source of real joy, is found. Now, it's so easy to make this mistake and to connect enjoyment just with self-indulgence. But real joy in life, deep joy, lasting joy, is found when we share our lives with others. Now we know that in theory, but in doing that is kind of difficult. I don't know about you, but I've never known someone who has a truly generous person who doesn't have with that a great joy in their lives. Now, giving and joy seem to be a package deal. Another proverb in Proverbs 19 and verse 17, it says that he or she who is kind to the poor lends to the Lord and will be rewarded for what they have done. Now, this story, we don't want to mistakenly think this is just that rich people are bad and poor people are not. I've known a lot of rich people who are very generous and joyful, and I've known a lot of poor people who are selfish and joyless. It's not about the amount. It's about our heart's desire and where that belongs. One of the examples of that that we'll get to a bit later on is King Solomon. This farmer, for instance, thought he could be happy by eating and drinking and indulging himself. In fact, Jesus quotes one of the great sayings of the Epicureans, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. And much of our lives can sort of fall into that trap, that we just sort of go through the process of eating, drinking, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. There's kind of a sad nihilism to all of that. This parable teaches that accumulating riches at the expense of a relationship with God is not a very wise thing. In fact, it's a foolish thing. That life does not consist in the abundance of things. Here's what Solomon said, as you might remember his journey in the book of Ecclesiastes. He said this. He says, I searched with my mind how to cheer my body with wine and how to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the sons of men to do under heaven during the few days of their life. I made great works, and I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. And I made myself gardens and parks, and I planted them all with all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which the water of the forest of growing trees. I also had great possessions of herds and flocks, more than anyone had been before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and treasure of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, a man's delight. And whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure. And then he sort of sums up his pursuit, which was a lifelong pursuit, by saying these words, that at the end of the day, it was all just vanity, meaningless. It was like chasing after the wind. The amount is not the issue, but money and God cannot be equally served. Money cannot buy that sense of usefulness and deeper joy. So this rich fool had really forgotten a whole bunch of stuff. He had forgotten his neighbours, he had forgotten the source of real joy, and he had forgotten time. Time's an interesting thing, isn't it, for us? Notice what he says in verse 19. He says, I have plenty of good things laid up for many years. He thought he had plenty of time when in reality, according to the story, he only had just a few moments left. Just a few. time passes so quickly. The years just seem to unfold, a bit like those old movies, when the calendar sort of goes off the wall and suddenly it's another date, another day, another month, another year. To live a life of joy and of balance is to live a life that includes time in its proper perspective. Here's what the book of James says. These are really challenging words, but I commend them to you. Read these sometimes in the quietness of your own heart. Where James says, today or tomorrow we will do this or do that or spend a year there or carry on business and make some money. Why? You do not even know what will happen tomorrow. And then he asks that question, what is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then it vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and we will do this or we will do that. They're pretty engaging words, aren't they? Pretty challenging words when we ask that question, well, what is our life? We need to constantly be on guard against this stuff because the world wants to drag us along that way. Maybe like never before in some people's lives, that question is being asked. Well, what is my life all about? It's been about getting exhausted, a bit like that peasant in that Russian story of just exhausting ourselves trying to gain something we can't keep at the expense of gaining that which we cannot lose. Jesus said, what good would it be if a person gains the whole world yet forfeits their own soul? So this man had forgotten some things that were pretty fundamental to a happy and balanced life. He forgot his neighbours, he forgot the source of real joy, he forgot time, and most importantly, he forgot God. He didn't utter one word about God in considering what to do with his abundance. My fruits, my barns, my future, my stuff, my life, my way. We've got to remember that God's plans are higher than our plans, that his way is smarter than our way. We need to remember that which is the right thing and forget that which is the wrong. As we finish our time together, we're going to sing together a great song that really articulates where our priorities lie. And if that question has been bugging you and will bug you, what is my life? Then perhaps it's a time to reflect on that and maybe have a conversation about it and to see what your life could be with Jesus Christ in it. Let's sing together a great song called One Day.
More than I could hope or dream of, you have poured your favor on me. One day in the house of God is better than 1,000 days in the world.
Well, thank you again for joining us. It's been great to worship with you again. And don't forget about Jesus the Game Changer. Those episodes are ready for you, and we hope that together we'll learn and grow and be about the things of God's kingdom. God bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May he lift up his countenance upon you and give you his perfect and everlasting peace.
So I turn